we'll do some brief introductions first. My name is Caroline Buttermere. I'm one of the outreach fellows with the Virginia Conservation Network this summer, and I'm a rising junior at William & Mary studying public policy and environmental science. So I'll pass it on to our other fellow.
Yeah, hello, I'm Titus. I'm also one of the outreach fellows at VCN this summer. I'm a rising fourth year at UVA studying global sustainability, and I'm super excited to hear our speakers speak today. So that being said, can we have each of our speakers do a quick round of introductions? Stuart, do you want to start that?
Sure, my name is Stuart Gardner. I work for a nonprofit organization called Generation 180, and I'm going to be talking about environmental careers in the private sector. Thanks for having me.
And then Mary-Carson.
Hi, my name is Mary-Carson Stiff, and I work for the nonprofit Wetlands Watch. We're based in Norfolk, Virginia, and work on nature-based solutions to climate change.
And then Andrea.
Hey, good morning. I'm Andria McClellan. I also am in Norfolk, Virginia, where I serve on the Norfolk City Council, among other things, and involved in a variety of environmental issues and conservation issues. Look forward to talking with you guys today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. So before we get started, I just briefly want to preface what VCN is. So Virginia Conservation Network is a nonprofit organization that connects over 150 partners statewide to facilitate and organize environmental movement. And all of you fellows and interns are one of those partners. Because VCN has such a wide range of partners, our focus can be divided into 4 main areas. Those would be clean water and flood resiliency, clean energy and climate, land and wildlife conservation, and land use and transportation. So during our 4 sessions over the next month, we are hoping to at least partially cover each one of these topics. And I also do want to note that we will have some Q&A time for each of the speakers. So please just be thinking about any questions that may come up for the speakers during their presentations. So now that we've done introductions and I gave that intro about VCN, I think we can get started with our content for today. Stuart, you can take it away.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to just share a couple slides here. You all can see that? Okay, so I'm going to be talking about private sector and how you can have a sustainability career environmental impact working for the private sector. I'm calling this mini roads to environmental work. Generation 180, we're a national nonprofit organization working to inspire and equip individuals to take action on clean energy. So the private sector, corporate greed, evil corporations, hear me out on this, okay? You can have a positive environmental impact in a corporation. My career up until about 3 years ago was always on the corporate side, and believe it or not, not everyone is evil. There are a lot of good people that care, and so some of my best friends are still corporate people and that do care about these topics. And really in the private sector, you have an amazing opportunity to get unparalleled industry and customer insight. Depending on what the business is focused on, you can really get intimate knowledge of what's going on in the industry. My background is all with automotive manufacturers. So during my career, learning about how cars are produced, how cars are planned, what's that long pipeline, how manufacturers work with dealers. It's really fascinating, and you get to leverage nearly unlimited resources. These businesses, as you know, have a lot of money, and so they have marketing budgets, for example, that can have a dramatic impact. And you get to do good work, perhaps where it's needed most. People need to be inspired to make good choices in businesses. So if you care about environmental issues and sustainability, private sector could be a good place for that. I grew up in a family of environmental scientists. My father was lifelong EPA. He was one of the original writers of the Clean Air Act in the 70s. My sister is environmental scientist with United Nations. So I grew up, dinner table conversations. We talked about what's coming out of smokestack. So that seemed very normal to me, having those conversations. But my passion was always cars. After business school, I went to work for Chrysler Europe in Brussels, Belgium, and did motor shows and motorsports. And it was great. Cars to me were always very tangible. People have opinions about cars. People, everyone's seen a car. So it was very real to me. There's a lot of great design and engineering that goes behind cars. So I was always fascinated by that. After Chrysler in Europe, I went to Dodge in the United States in Detroit and worked on a program to bring Dodge back to NASCAR auto racing. And as you may not be surprised, there wasn't a lot of talk about environmental impact and NASCAR. Totally focused on big, powerful engines, not tailpipe exhaust. But where I really began to be inspired about how businesses can be acting sustainably was with Volkswagen. I worked with Volkswagen of America for about 10 years before joining Gen 180. And I worked in both product marketing and brand marketing. And on the product marketing side, I led the development of the Golf family. And one of those vehicles was the e-Golf. And I was just really surprised that people would be so excited. When we talk to the e-Golf customers, electric vehicle customers, when we were planning these cars, they loved them. And that that really stood out to me. Hey, how can and why are these folks so passionate about these electric vehicles? So it really kind of inspired me to say, well, I want to be part of that. I want to see what's going on there. Unfortunately, I think everyone knows about that time, Volkswagen was caught in its diesel emission scandal. They paid nearly $3 billion in fines. A lot of states are still reaping those VW settlement dollars. And that was, obviously a horrible time for customers and the environment, but also for VW employees. We went from a company that was most loved for years and had a good environmental record to the most hated company in America, more hated than Halliburton and any other big evil corporate giant that you can imagine. So really tough time. Really, there's an example of that corporate greed that you hear so much about. And that was, frankly, shocking. But coming out of that was the opportunity to reinvent the brand. And it was fascinating to be part of that because we got to say, all right, let's rebuild. Let's rebuild with a vision of zero emission vehicles. Let's understand what that industry and that market is all about, the customers. So huge opportunity to work with dealers, to build charging infrastructure, to understand customers and what they wanted out of vehicles. So really an exciting time, even though it came from something awful. So can you be an environmentalist in the private sector? Can you have a career around sustainability? Yes, absolutely. Especially if it saves money or makes money. And if the customer demands it. Businesses want to differentiate it. So it's not necessarily about greenwashing. It's about standing out, doing something different, doing something better. And frankly, I think our movement, environmental movement, needs diversity of expertise. It's really helpful to understand the way different people talk and what different people care about. Being able to talk to dealers to demonstrate why they should care about EVs. You use different language than if you're talking to environmental nonprofit. Just some examples of private sector roles you consider, product marketing, facilities. Volkswagen had an amazing LEED certified factory where they used rainwater to flush the toilets. There's lots of cool things like that. Purchasing, distribution, engineering, government affairs, legal, every role you can have an environmental role to play. And kind of lastly, know what inspires you. If you're thinking about a career in private sector, whether it's a brand, a product, or a customer, think about why you care about those things and create a personal narrative around it, so you can explain to the hiring manager, hey, this is why I'm excited about it. And the third bullet in the private sector, presentation skills are really important. So if you're thinking about like, hey, what are some of the skills I need to practice? Don't read slides, be to the point, know your data. Mastering the presentation skills are really important. And then finally, everyone can be an environmentalist. Just because you work in a corporation doesn't mean that you have to give it all up to corporate greed. We need environmentalists in all businesses and all sectors. So that's my presentation. Thanks so much for having me. Look forward to a discussion later.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing with us. That was a great presentation. So now we'll just open up the floor for some questions. Stuart does have to leave perhaps earlier than everyone else. So we will have the Q&A session for his presentation now, but then for the next two speakers, we'll hold off all our questions until the end. We'll have like a bigger Q&A session. So yeah, does anyone have any questions for Stuart?
Stuart, what do you drive?
I ride a motorcycle.
You should just say e-bike. That's much better.
E-bike, yeah.
I'll jump in with a question. This is Luca from Wetlands Watch. Can you speak a little bit to like lithium and the way that the electric industry is going to affect the environment? I did a little bit of work on that last year, and lithium mine is really extensive and a little toxic. So I didn't know if you had a position on it for EVs.
Yeah, totally. It's a big issue, and fortunately, people realize that it's a big issue. So manufacturers have acknowledged that, hey, it's a raw material that's rare. So they are working to say, hey, how can you develop batteries that require less lithium? How can you create batteries that are easily recyclable? How can you join international agreements to make sure that mining practices are sustainable? So it's totally an issue. I think the industry acknowledges that it's an issue, so they're trying to improve on that. Oftentimes too, I think electric vehicles, questions get asked about electric vehicles that never get asked of internal combustion engines. How is petroleum, what's that whole process of mining for petroleum? That's not good either. So just because lithium has some issues doesn't mean that we should just go to petroleum because lithium is bad. But totally agree that the batteries are an issue, but fortunately they're trying to create smarter batteries. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you.
One of the questions in the chat are hydrogen fuel vehicles part of the transportation electrification movement. I think people, yes, however, the hydrogen thing is a little more difficult because where do you refuel hydrogen? So you really need to, where everyone electric plug is much more accessible, places to refuel hydrogen, the infrastructure is just not there, just like we were talking about electric vehicles 10 years ago. But I think that's the big issue behind hydrogen fuel vehicles taking off.
I have a question, Stuart. Will VW start using the Tesla chargers?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like that is where the industry is going. I can't imagine, if I was in charge of their product line, I would say they should. It brings instant, it addresses range anxiety pretty instantly. It seems like that's the way people are going. I would be surprised if I would not be surprised if all manufacturers adopted that standard, or at least had the option to be compatible. Do you foresee charging stations nationwide keeping up with demand for electric vehicles? I think the bigger issue is retraining people's minds about how you refuel. So, we all grew up in the back of the car watching, drive up to the gas station, you fill up, you drive till it's empty. So kind of the model for electric vehicles is different. You're kind of topping up when it's convenient for you. So you don't necessarily need this infrastructure every block for gas stations. You charge where you're going anyhow. If you go to Walmart, then you can charge while you're in the Walmart. If you go to get a sandwich at Starbucks, you charge right in the Starbucks. So the model will be different. So yeah, I think it'll keep up, especially with all the investment through the IIJA. Currently work at Gen 180. What do you see as the major difference between when you worked in the private sector versus nonprofit? I mean, the size and scope of organizations. So Volkswagen globally was 600,000 people. Generation 180 is 16. So, when you're, at least when at Volkswagen, your whole world was Volkswagen. So even though you're dealing with people all across the United States or all across the world, they are part of that Volkswagen ecosystem, where with Gen 180, the ecosystem is all of you all. It's beyond just the Gen 180 office. You really have to think of everyone in other organizations as partners, not just the people within your own organizations. And just the scale of what you can do. If you have a $5 million marketing budget versus a $500 million marketing budget, the scope of what you can do is much different.
I have a question. So like in the private sector, when you're working on creating products or services that are like more environmentally friendly, what's sort of like the biggest pushback that you see from that? Like, is it mostly the money aspect, or like, what are the other things sort of that, people, why they don't want to do that?
Yeah, everything is proving a business case. The language everyone says, does it pencil? Meaning like, can you make money off of it? And so that's where you really have to know the industry and say, hey, the customer wants this, or this is, look at your competitors, they're doing it, we need to be doing it too, or hey, no one's doing this yet, this could be a key differentiator for us. So it's really proving that business point and demonstrating that that it has value. I think that's the biggest question you get is, it's prove to me that someone wants this, prove to me that it's worth us investing in.
Okay.
And if people have questions, you can always email me. Love chatting with people. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for answering our questions. All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and move on to the next speaker. Titus, you want to transition us?
Of course. So, Andrea, if you would like to share, sorry, I'm lagging a little bit. The floor is all yours, Andrea. Go ahead and start your presentation.
Thanks, Titus. So I'm not as cool as Stuart, and I do not have any slides. So you guys just we're just have a sort of free flow of discussion here. I've been a little bit busy. It seems like for the past 3 years, I ran for lieutenant governor in the Democratic primary in 2021 unsuccessfully, and then I just ran for the state Senate Democratic primary unsuccessfully. So I am here just as your city council person, talking about local government, but also can talk about state government as well, and want to chat with you guys about opportunities to get involved in the public sector, and whether that's working for local or state government, or maybe seeking office someday yourselves. So by background, I've driven an EV for 5 years. That's my questions there. So big proponent there. Prior to joining the city council, I was elected in 2016 I served on the Planning Commission for 3 years, and so very interested in land use policy. The thing that I think I'm probably most known for in Norfolk and our region is my advocacy work on flooding and resilience. This has been a huge issue. If you don't know, Norfolk, one of the facts that we often tout is Norfolk is second only to New Orleans in terms of flood risk. So it's a huge issue for us here. It's both tidal flooding as well as precipitation or sunny day flooding that we're seeing I'm sorry, tidal flooding and sunny day flooding, as well as precipitation events as well, or rain bombs that we're getting. Mary-Carson and I worked on this issue for many, many years together. I think we first met at the William and Mary Coastal Policy Law Center, as a matter of fact. I now serve on the joint subcommittee on flooding at the state level as a local elected representative there. I was appointed by Governor McCullough and then reappointed by Governor Northam to serve on the Chesapeake Bay Program's Local Government Advisory Committee. So I like to say I care about both water quality and water quantity. But it's a huge issue for me as well. I also am a former chair of Hampton Roads Transit, which is our regional transit authority. So I'm a big advocate for public transit, and I'm pleased as a result of the VW settlement, I'll come full circle, Virginia got funding, and that funding came down to HRT to fund the first 6 public transit buses in the Commonwealth. So, and that's one of the things that I'm working on as well, is the electrification of our fleet. I served on a statewide committee to bring offshore wind off the coast of Virginia Beach. I'm excited about the CVOW project, the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project that's happening here. I also am very interested in affordable housing and how that connects to issues of the environment too, and making sure that people live in energy efficient, affordable housing. So that's something that I've been focused on. But, you know, in terms of, you know, my entry into politics, I went to UVA, Wahoo, heard a couple of Virginia grads there. I have a degree in Asian studies and economics. And then of course worked for Dow Chemical and sold plastics after that, because that makes all the sense in the world. My career path is not one that is traditional or in a straight line at all. And what I will tell you is, I think, and what you're doing here is just take advantage of everything all the time. And there may be a change in your path at some point in your life, and I'm sure there will be. But it's all those people and places and opportunities that you've accumulated along the way that build that foundation for you. So what you're doing this summer with this internship, the fact I love that somebody asked for a LinkedIn link in the chat. The fact that you're building your network at this age and at this stage in your life just really bodes well for where you're going to go, each and every one of you. So yes, I sold plastics, and now I'm the anti-plastic person. I know a lot about recycling and the myths of recycling. I went into corporate America. I never thought I would get into politics. I worked for 2 Fortune 500 companies. I ran 2 small businesses of my own before my husband and I moved back to the Hampton Roads region. So I was raised in Virginia Beach and said I was getting the hell out of here and I was never coming back. I lived in outside of New York, lived in Philadelphia, lived in LA, and got dragged back here 25 years ago. And so I would encourage each and every one of you to go spread your wings and go places far and distant and wide. And at some point, maybe you want to come home. But I have 3 boys of my own now. Our boys are 18, 21, and 24. And I encourage them just to go out and see the world. So fast forward, I had moved back here. I was a mom to 3. I was a community volunteer and a big advocate, you know, a variety of things in the community. I got involved in 2008 in the Obama campaign and started knocking doors and became a precinct captain, and the rest is history. And I helped a lot of other elected officials get elected. And then in 2016, I decided to run against a 16-year incumbent here in Norfolk and was told at the time to wait my turn. This isn't how it's done. We pick a businessman, Andrea. That's what I was literally told by one person, and fund him, nice pronouns. And I beat him in 19 of 23 precincts, and I've loved it. And I did it because I felt like there wasn't a voice on our city council that was asking the tough questions and that was standing up to the power structure. And that's why I do what I do right now. And I think as you all, as folks are looking to get into the conservation community or continue your career there, what I want to tell you today is that you are subject matter experts and your elected officials need your help. They might not know that they need your help, but they need your help because we can't be expert in everything. And quite honestly, most elected officials have no idea about most environmental issues. I'm just going to call it out for what it is. Mary-Carson, what do you think? Yes, you agree? And so I would encourage you all to set up an appointment wherever you are going to be, wherever you find yourself settled at some point. Go and meet your local board of supervisors, your council members, your school board members, and not for anything of need, but just to introduce yourself and let them know who you are, what your interests are, and how you can help. I always tell my kids, help somebody before you need their help, because they're much more likely to answer your email or text or phone call. Volunteer in their campaigns, get involved. That's what we really need. And most of us don't have much of a staff, and we definitely don't have tons of experts who can guide us on various issues. I'm really proud of the fact that I was the co-author for Norfolk's Climate Action Plan in 2018, and we brought together a group of subject matter experts and stakeholders from throughout the community. And I continue to rely on these individuals to this day on various issues. Unfortunately, we have a climate action plan, unfortunately, we don't do a lot with it because we just don't have the funding to do everything that's needed. And quite honestly, I'm one of 8 people on my city council, and I don't have a lot of other cheerleaders on city council who want to do this stuff. So that's sort of the sad reality. I think a lot of elected officials just really are not focused on the environment. What I would say though, in terms of how to advocate, here's how not to advocate. Don't scream at your elected official. Don't call them out on Twitter. Don't call them bad names. Don't think that they're the bad guy because they can't do everything that you want. Because the fact of the matter is we're all just trying to, we're all human, and we're trying to do the right thing. And I think everybody understands that when somebody screams at you, you probably aren't going to want to listen to that person that's screaming at you. So help them and understand that sometimes, I know we're in a climate crisis, I get it, and we have to do more, so much more, but it's better to at least make some incremental steps than to do nothing. And oftentimes as elected officials, when we are asked to do everything, we can't get there. But recognize that there is a sense of urgency. We need to understand that, but screaming at us doesn't really affect the change that you want. So those are my main things that I wanted to talk about today. I would just say, get involved, be part of the solution. Honestly, so few people get involved in the local government level that you be amazed at how much positive impact that you could make. So I would encourage you all to attend those boring city council meetings and school board meetings, and also try and get on a local committee. If you have an environmental commission in your county or your city, get involved there. The other thing that I would say is we need more young people. And oftentimes those voices aren't at the table just because everybody's busy, living their life. And so I think there's an opportunity for everybody here in that regard as well. So happy to answer any questions. I would also say, yes.
Thank you so much. So yeah, if anyone has any questions. I'm so sorry. My internet, it's gone. It's so gone right now.
Hey, Titus, if you maybe turn off your video, you won't lag as much.
That's a good idea. I interrupted you, Andrea. Please continue with your.
Any budding politicians, future elected officials here? Has anybody worked on a campaign? No. Well, Mary-Carson has.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Andrea, why are local governments so important on the climate change issue?
Gosh, well, one, we own a ton of buildings. And we have a huge fleet of vehicles. And we're one of the largest employers. So, we impact, so much in that area. From a zoning standpoint, hugely important. Norfolk redid our zoning code in 2019. It was very controversial at the time because the builders said it was going to cost more to build houses in Norfolk. But we redid our zoning code because we knew that we were going to require folks to create more resilient houses where flood insurance would be less expensive and the homeowners could be assured that the house is going to be around decades more. So the zoning code and land use policies is a huge piece of the puzzle. And most people don't think about that, quite honestly. We need to put our money where our mouth, we need to do a better job as a city, in the city of Norfolk, I would say. We don't have very energy efficient buildings, and we need to be doing more there. Our fleet is, we don't have EVs. At this point, we're about to undertake an electric vehicle charging infrastructure study. So the question earlier about charging infrastructure is really important, particularly in a city like Norfolk, which is urban and very developed, where a lot of people don't have off-street parking. We've got to figure out how we're going to tackle EVs in that situation as well. So Mary-Carson, I could go on, but thank you for teeing that up. Appreciate that. Gabrielle has a question.
Hi, I'm from the Hampton Roads area, specifically Yorktown, but all my family's from Norfolk, so I understand the issues. But I have a question about how can we convince elected officials to even believe in climate change, or like even believe in like adopting climate adaptation policies or climate resilience policies. My county is pretty conservative, and they have said multiple times that like climate change isn't real, and that but we're a coastal county, so I don't really understand why they believe that. So I'm wondering what your perspective is on how I could convince them.
Yeah, so oh gosh, it's such an important and great question. So I served as the chair for the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. So that represents all 17 municipalities. So some red, some blue, some urban, some suburban, some rural, right? And amazingly, we actually unanimously voted to adopt sea level scenarios of 1.5 feet by 2050, 3 feet by 2080, and 4 to 5 feet by 2100, which I think is probably still pretty conservative, right, Mary-Carson? But I think we finally are able to say sea level rise too, by the way, in Virginia. We used to call it recurrent flooding. You couldn't even say sea level rise. But I think universally people understand that flooding is happening and that some of these changes we are seeing. It's the causality piece that people just refuse to identify. And I think some of it is generational too. I think that the politics, from all that I understand, it's a blue-red divide in terms of believing in science and the climate crisis is real. But I do believe that your generation, it's less the case. I do think that you all have grown up with this, so some of it's that. So I try and affect change where I know we can talk about flooding in Hampton Roads, for example. And we talk about putting flood sensors in our roads, and we can talk about the fact that we need money to address flooding. And ideally, we are doing in such a way that we're leading with nature-based solutions, right? But we recognize that that's not going to be, we're going to need both green infrastructure and gray infrastructure. So I try and focus on the areas in the the Venn diagram that you all are familiar with, right? I try and focus on the area in the middle where there is some overlap as opposed to always thinking about the edges. And then we're going to slowly push folks or pull them, depending on your perspective, into understanding those other elements as well. But it is maddening and frustrating that people think that climate change and the climate crisis is a hoax. I agree. I completely agree. But you know what? When somebody's car gets flooded out, that's the reality.
I have a question too, because you are in Norfolk. I was wondering how, wait, let me collect my, I was wondering if the work you do with the city oftentimes intersects with the Navy and the military, because Norfolk is like home to the largest naval station in the world. Like, how are you guys working with the Navy to improve sea level rise and all the other environmental problems?
Not enough. Part of that is because the DoD doesn't typically spend any money outside of the gate, right? So they don't have the funding to do what they need to do. They did implement a couple of programs in the last 5 to 7 years called the Defense Access Roads Act, and something called DSIP, which is the Defense Community Infrastructure Program, where they're starting to work with localities where we can do joint projects. But the amount of money that you're talking about is, I forget specifically, Mary-Carson might know more, like $50 million annually nationwide, something in that magnitude. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, it's not that much, but the city of Norfolk, for example, could get, like a significant portion each year to help get Hampton Boulevard more accessible, for example.
Right. So the main artery that leads on and off the world's largest naval base in the world floods oftentimes. So you would think that the Navy would want to spend more money there, but they don't. Typically, we have done something called JLUS, which is a joint land use study project with Virginia Beach and Norfolk and the Navy, where we've identified specific flooded areas. So the answer is not enough. The Navy knows there's an issue, but they don't have enough money to spend on the base itself, so they often don't outside of that. I will tell you though that, and you might have read about this, Norfolk was very fortunate. Through the infrastructure bill, we received a little under $400 million to help us with our coastal storm risk management plan. And what is that? That's an Army Corps project that we undertook, something called a 3x3x3 study, 3 years, $3 million, 3 phases. It was completed in 2018, I think, 2019, and basically deals with only tidal flooding, but tidal flooding throughout Norfolk. And when the project was initially completed, that first phase of the project, it was cited as a $1.4 billion project. It is now escalated to $2.6 billion project, and it's 5 phases. It's an Army Corps project, and so we have what's called a new start, which means it's a big deal because the Army Corps is basically committed to getting through all 5 phases of the project once they start something. So we've got $400 million to start us. The challenge is the way these federal projects work is it requires a 35% non-federal match. So non-federal doesn't necessarily mean city, it could be city and it could be state. And so our challenge is the state at this point hasn't gotten involved to the extent that we need them to on this project. And as a matter of fact, the only funding that we've gotten from the state, which is about 25 million, and by the way, we need about 450 million from the state as order of magnitude, is money that's come through RGGI. So I'm assuming this group is familiar with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, which the state got started in 2020, and has generated a little over $500 million in proceeds from the auctions as a result of that. And our governor, current governor, one of his first actions in office was to declare that he wanted to get us out of RGGI because that was the only source of funding for flooding. And that made all the sense in the world. I'm being completely sarcastic. So we don't know where the state's going to come up with this money, but they need to, and we need them to be partners. And so to the point that I made earlier about not yelling at people and poking them in the eyeballs. It's hard, right? Because we need the state to be our friend. And so I can't scream too much, but at the same time, I want to point out the idiot idea that we should be getting out of Reggie. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing and for everyone with their questions and stuff. It's cool that you were talking about Reggie just now. Actually, our next session of the Summer Speaker Series next week, July 13th, same time, same day, we will be talking about Reggie. So more to come on that if you want to hear about it. But let's move on to our last speaker, Mary-Carson. You could go ahead and give us your presentation.
Can you see this PowerPoint? Yeah, cool. All right, I'm gonna fly through this. So our organization is Wetlands Watch. We're a nonprofit based in Norfolk, Virginia, working statewide and a little bit beyond on nature-based solutions to climate change. This is a picture of my neighborhood in Norfolk, Virginia, where the Elizabeth River, or a branch of it, the Lafayette, becomes completely a part of the road and a part of the neighborhood during our higher high tide events. That wasn't even a storm. So that's kind of the magnitude of this issue here, as Andrea mentioned, second only to New Orleans in terms of impacts. We also have the fastest rate of sea level rise on the East Coast. So that's a new NOAA stat. So this is the magnitude. You can see people gathering here in the street just to look at it. It's just crazy. All right, so our organization, this is what we do. Our mission is there in the middle. We work where land, communities, and water meet. This is really important because there is absolutely no way that you can work on climate change, sea level rise in particular, if you are not thinking about land, people, and water. So it's all those things all in combination. We have a ton of programmatic work in our organization that we're doing, but it's kind of looped into these buckets that I'm going to talk about today. And we're going to go into more detail about each one. I want to just talk very briefly about our organizational approach to give you a sense of what types of nonprofits there are out there. Our nonprofit is a little bit unusual. We function very much like a boundary organization where we are taking information from users and kind of translating it, from producers, translating it into more understandable, digestible information and sending it to the users. We are doing this the opposite way as well. So it's happening both ways. And we're also subject matter experts and operate like a think tank or like a consultancy group. So we're a little weird, but we are a product of the impacts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Our organization is very concerned with gap filling and filling the needs that have been identified by the people who are experiencing the harm. So every time we take on a project, we try to do a needs assessment to make sure we are serving a function that is truly needed and trying to do it in a way that is desired by the end user. Okay, so climate change impacts, this is just to show you that we're not just talking about high tides, we're talking about wind increases and strength. We're talking about storm surge, rainfall, groundwater. As sea level rises, this makes our floodplains and our flood depths grow and increase. And this creates more damage and more costs. So again, people are part of this, governments are made up of people and are serving people. And so the cost becomes exponential immediately. As Andrea mentioned, the costs that are required for their work, it's unimaginable costs, right? And the people who are on the hook for all of this, it's not people in Richmond, it's not our General Assembly, it's our local governments. And not only are they in charge of planning for all of this and helping protect people and their safety, but they're also saddled with a ton of mandates that are coming from our legislators. And it's important for legislatures to require governments to do things, particularly when you have York County that doesn't believe in climate change, for example. It's important to keep governments moving at the local level, but you have to be mindful that they are doing it alone. And so our organization serves local governments as our major stakeholder. We are constantly thinking about how to make life easier for local government staff. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about our first area that we're going to talk about today. Of course, we have more that our organization is doing, but flood risk management. So flood risk is pretty obvious. In our region, we're not having snow days. Very infrequently we have snow days sometimes, but we have flood days where students miss school because they cannot safely get to school, or we have school delays. And so this is our reality. And one of the reasons why kids can't get to school is because all of the streets are serving as our conveyance system. And why is that? Because we filled in all of our creek beds. So this is on the right is an image of the old Norfolk's old land map. And the image on the left is our new current state of affairs. So you can see the yellow, which might be kind of difficult to see. This is showing all the old creek beds. So obviously, people are having a hard time getting to work, getting to school, because they are traveling in old creek beds. And the water is coming back because it doesn't have anywhere to go as sea levels rise. So this is why our impacts are so significant. From a flood mitigation standpoint, our strategies are not very smart. They are smart. They're for temporary and for safety. Of course, you want to keep people safe, but they're Band-Aid solutions to a larger problem. When your water looks like this, a home elevation does no good, because your people are, one heart attack away from suing the government for the lack of availability to service them in an emergency scenario. So this is kind of the magnitude of the problem and why we really need smart solutions. So we're constantly thinking about how we can create smarter solutions to problems like that. The focus of the organization is definitely on wetlands. That's kind of the origin story of our organization. We're a watchdog group started by citizens who are concerned with poor care of existing wetlands and local governments not following the laws that are in place for wetlands protection. And so we have really shifted into climate change adaptation because we want to protect our wetlands. But the greatest risk to wetlands is not one-off development decisions, which of course are very important still, but sea level rise. In Virginia, our wetlands cannot grow vertically at pace with sea level rise. Sea level rise is growing just a little bit faster. And so all of our wetlands are drowning unless they have a place to go horizontally into the landscape. So when they're drowning, they have to be able to move in order to survive. And so what does this look like? It's bad. So we're looking at 2040, 19% loss, 2060, 49% loss, and 2080, a whopping 89% loss. This is a state-sponsored statistic, and it is representative of what happens if you don't plan for migration of wetlands. The problem with migration of wetlands is that there's a ton of stuff in the way. And so you have to be thinking, if we care about our natural infrastructure, if we really believe that it's critical infrastructure, we have to create a plan for its survival. Unfortunately, there are a ton of laws that are in play and adjacently in play, and governed by two different agencies at the state level, and frequently two different citizen elected boards and appointed board members. So it's a complicated policy problem, and it's one that our organization is spending a ton of time thinking about. And in this thinking about, we're also strategizing about how to implement solutions. And so one of the things that our organization is thinking a lot about is what happens at the grass top level. So we have national nonprofits, we have academic institutions that are creating all of these strategies and plans, but they're not testing them on the ground. And so our organization is spending a lot of time testing these strategies. Will they actually work? Y'all say that they're a big climate adaptation solution, but so what? You say it, let's prove it. And What we're doing right now is testing this concept of a rolling easement. You may have heard about it, but it's essentially a legal tool to deal with the problem of the public right imposing upon the private right with time and sea level rise. So sea level rise is moving, all of our shorelines are going to change, and all of the ownership is going to change from private to public because the public owns the water. And so there's no tool, there's no local government standard for how to deal with this. And we really need to create strategies that operate within the law and that are enforceable to help governments who are going to be on the hook for cleaning up this mess, or are going to be sued by property owners for the confusion it's going to cause. We really need solutions to help remedy that. So we're trying to get a rolling easement, and there's no real need to go into too much detail, but essentially we're trying to get a rolling easement over this entire parcel. This is a property in the city of Norfolk, and this easement will basically say that when the wetlands move too close to the structure, then the structure has to be demolished and the entire parcel has to be renaturalized or naturalized. So this is a wetland survival tactic, and it also addresses this legal challenge of a changing coastline, which will result in changing ownership and outright loss of ownership. So we're trying to do this, and it's really, really hard. We'll let you know how it goes. All right, so then local governments. Local governments are on the hook. Oh, I see, it's 59. Okay, well, local governments are on the hook. It's all going to come down to them. So we're working on innovative strategies for local governments to deal with this. And the zoning ordinance that was mentioned by Andrea is one that's very innovative. We have tools, strategies for local government people that kind of simplify what's been done, what's worked, what hasn't worked. We do training through a ton of different avenues for decision makers. We also have a student design collaboratory where students just like yourselves in capstone projects, whether it be policy or architecture, come into the organization, and we connect them with citizen leaders, maybe it's a civic league and a local government, and we help create the test bed of designs that will help a community adapt to this change. And finally, we do a ton of green infrastructure. So this hole that needs to be filled is that there's so much more water everywhere, and we need solutions that deal with water on site. And governments are coming around to this strategy, and individuals are coming around to this strategy. But no one knows how to manage these parcel level solutions. And so we created, in partnership with many across the Bay watershed, a Chesapeake Bay landscape design professional certification that trains installers, designers, and maintenance crew for how to actually manage these new small scale parcel level solutions for dealing with water. And it's going amazing. We have over 1,000 people trained. We're also offering small grants in partnership with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. So property owners, local governments, nonprofit organizations can install resilient solutions to address climate change, as well as planting trees, which are very important from a health, equity, EJ standpoint, as well as stormwater absorption. Trees can do a ton to absorb stormwater. So we've got a new grant program that we're running. We also do citizen science, where or community science that's crowdsourcing data collection using phone apps. And this is bringing us into schools, working with civic organizations, and helping people be a part of the solution. Data that's collected is then sent to decision makers to help them plan for, maybe that school bus should never have gone through that floodwater. Maybe there's an alternative route. And so this is a tool that we're using to help create alternative pathways for people to travel. And all of the GPS that's collected through the phone app is then sent to modelers at universities to test their predictive models as well. So pretty cool. We have an annual event called Catch the King, and I urge you to participate, and can include a link in the chat. So that's what we've got going on, and I know that it's probably time to conclude.
No worries. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's open up the floor for Q&A. I mean, this session officially runs until 11:15, so we still have 10 minutes for questions. Yeah. Sorry if you were rushing at the end, but yeah. Any questions for Mary-Carson? I guess I can start us off. You mentioned trees sort of at the end. I was wondering, like, is that one of sort of the best solutions in terms of like, I don't know, like the solution for, I guess, resiliency against floods in terms of not necessarily like treating the cause, but like treating the symptoms?
Yeah, it's one solution. I mean, it's very small scale. You have to have a lot of trees to be able to absorb some of the excess water that's on a site. One of the best ways to, the only 100% effective form of mitigation from these risks is to get out of the way, unfortunately. So there's a lot of discussion about living shorelines being a resilient solution. Living shorelines are a very important solution. They are water quality necessary and they are habitat necessary. They also open the door for wetlands migration. They are a storm energy reducer. They are not a flood stopper. So that's a really common misconception of living shorelines. They are a resilient solution, but they will not stop your house from flooding. They will stop your house from maybe getting hammered from a storm, and that they'll slow down impacts of waves, but they're not going to stop the flooding outright. So there's no 100% solution other than to, pump it out through big pumps, or to get out of the way, unfortunately. So it's kind of a, you have to have a lot of money to do both of those things. It costs a lot of money to buy people out of their homes. And it costs a lot of money to pump and pipe it out, or to put a wall and pumps and pipes, because you can't have a wall without pumps. And all of this is just astronomically expensive.
Hey, Mary-Carson, you didn't mention the R word.
I didn't. So our organization has.
Maybe we should say what that means, by the way, first.
Yeah, retreat. So, right, there are too many words now that we have to be careful. So retreat is basically removing yourself or a community from risk. And that is absolutely what will be the outcome of all of this. But our organization is trying to take a different approach, because it's a scary thing to talk about and governments are not ready to talk about it. And so we've been focused on wetlands migration, which can be more strategic. It focuses inherently on multiple benefits. And we think that finding where pocket wetlands want to go and where conditions are favorable for them to go, and conditions, I mean like slope, is the number one favorable condition. In those areas, that's where we should focus our buyouts, in my opinion. And from our organizational kind of perspective, we want to do smart, targeted buyouts that show the community that there is a multiple benefit. There are some places that, wetlands won't migrate and people really can't live because it's not safe. And that will need to happen too. But we are using wetlands migration, Andrea, instead of retreat now.
And just FYI, our largest source of revenue at the local government level is real estate taxes.
That's right.
So the reason local governments don't want to talk about retreat is when you start taking properties off the tax rolls, you have less money to spend on public safety, on schools, on roads, etc. So it is it's all interconnected, but sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, Adriana.
Yeah, I was just a wonderful presentation, by the way, but I was while listening to it, I was making connections with how it seems like your work, especially with like wetlands migration and everything, will greatly kind of collaborate with local or state officials, whether that's through grants, whether that's through like educating like constituents or anything like that. But is there any crossover with like the private sector? Is there, or is that just like completely separate in order to achieve these goals?
Yeah, great question. The private sector has been largely silent on this. There was an effort, I mean, almost 10 years ago, Andrew, right, to like integrate the business community. We had the Port of New Orleans president come and talk about just how absolutely screwed they were and didn't have a plan when Katrina hit. And we thought that that would kind of scare our private sector folks into movement, and it did absolutely nothing. I will say that we saw the first sign of movement when the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, or HRSD, presented recently at a regional planning authority meeting where they created a climate resilience plan. And they did this because of Hurricane Matthew, which was an atmospheric river over Hampton Roads. And that's that rain bomb effect that Andrew's talking about. And that scared the mess out of them. And they decided that in concert with Hurricane Harvey in Houston scared them too. And there were a lot of impacts to pump stations and water treatment plants in Harvey. So those two things, they said, okay, I guess this is real now, and we need to at least assess our risk. And so they did an assessment of all of their facilities. And that was the first time that we have seen a private sector entity come to the table with all of those people, multi-sector groups working on resilience, and say, here's our plan, we're ready to work with you. That was landmark, and it happened last month. So this, I hope, will be a sea change for our private sector, but to date, they have been silent. And it's because the planning scenarios are different. So businesses are thinking on a much smaller time horizon than governments are. And the Hampton Roads Sanitation District is it's a government, I mean, it's a private sector entity, but it's serving government function. And so it is not fully independent of infrastructure concerns. So I'll just say that, it's a little bit unusual. Now, there are larger companies that, that have big infrastructure, like Norfolk Southern, for example, but, we haven't seen a resilience plan from them. There's one church in Norfolk that has a sea level rise strategy. They're not a business, of course, they're a nonprofit, but they're kind of like, a different group that's come to play.
Yeah, I would say yes to all of those things. And it's crazy that our businesses aren't thinking about this more. It's a really good question, Andriana. I will say the chamber, the Hampton Roads Chamber, is very supportive of resilience planning and flood mitigation. They don't talk at all about the causality. Getting to the point we talked about earlier with Gabrielle, but they're at least talking about this. They realize that it is an issue. But we, the city of Norfolk, have integrated our flood sensors and with Waze.
Yep.
So now people, I mean, this is the reality right now. To Mary-Carson's point, like it's not snow days, it's flood days. This is
so real. And in coastal Virginia, it is really important to note that the impacts are baked in. There's absolutely nothing that we are going to do from a mitigation of carbon standpoint to stop what is going to happen. There's nothing you can do. It's too late. And so we don't talk about the cause that much. We talk about the impacts because that's all that matters. And so you don't have to go into the politics of this anymore in coastal Virginia. You just don't. The impacts are there and you talk about that. If Tangier wants to talk about erosion, that's fine, because it doesn't matter ultimately. Their shoreline is eroding for one reason or another, and they have to do something about it. So it's an unusual situation that, from a nonprofit standpoint, we don't have to go political. I mean, we do, and we are, and we're anti, pulling eye wrenching, all that stuff, but we don't have to. And so when we go to Yorktown and they're like, we don't believe in climate change, we're like, we don't care that you don't believe in climate change. That's on you. You're already impacted. So focus on that.
Thank you so much. I think we're gonna have to end the Q&A session here. Andriana wanted to just share a couple things about our upcoming events real quickly.
Yeah, so thank you so much for answering my questions. They were like, I feel like I've learned so much. But just to transition quickly for the sake of time, there are 3 events I'd like to share. Well, more than 3, but our first one is the election training series, and all links are in the chat. So the 3 different links are here in consecutive order. Our election training series, we have 2 sessions on July 12th and 13th. The first one on the 12th is the legalities, the legal do's and don'ts when it comes with election year advocacy for 501c3 nonprofits. So especially if you're interested in the policy side, and this is for all levels, whether you're a fellow intern or a seasoned expert, right? This is kind of if you want a refresher or just want to learn about the legal do's and don'ts and what is illegal and what isn't for 501c3s. I definitely recommend this, especially if you're interested in going into politics. On the 13th is going to be more of it's an interactive workshop that is focused on actually trying to assess where your organizations are for advocacy, where their capacity levels are. So, for example, if Mary-Carson Stiff from Wetlands Watch wanted to get into election year advocacy with the organization, but want to know what the strengths, weaknesses, areas of growth are, this would be a great workshop. And we're also having a VCM partner panel on the 13th after, with some actual examples that our partners are doing for advocacy. The next one is we are having a photo contest that ends July 14th, so it's about a week left. But this is if you know someone that does photography or you do photography yourself, we have 3 main categories that you can see on the blog post that's in the chat. But there are the grand prize is $150, and the main photo will become the cover of our Common Agenda environmental briefing book, which is really exciting. And then of course, we have 3 other $75 prizes, and then also we try to use almost all the photos within our book, so you would get one of your photos actually published, which is really cool. And then the last one is, so just calling up because I know the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative was brought up. That session is next week, and it's going to be Reggie isn't in the name, but it's the water urban air. It's something with water air quality, and it's on the 13th. So definitely recommend signing up for that if you haven't already. All right, so that's all from VCN side. I did want to request from Mary-Carson Stiff and Andria McClellan, if you guys could share your LinkedIn or emails or whatever in the chat. So if anyone wanted to contact you, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep, that would be great. I think that's all from us. Thank you again to our speakers so much for joining us today, sharing your knowledge with us, to Stuart too, who already had to leave, and thank you to all the fellows and interns who made time to come and learn.